Super Robot Wars! Super Robot Wars! Super Robot Wars! We're playing Battle Century G! Battle Century G is a game designed by Super Robot Wars fans for Super Robot Wars fans. And if you know anything about me, you know I dig giant robots. So this tutorial is going to be way more biased than normal. You've been warned. The principle behind this game is to replicate not only the aesthetics of Japanese giant robot shows, but also allow players to recreate their favorite mechs regardless of genre. The result is a very streamlined but highly customizable experience. First, I'm going to discuss the core mechanic, then I'll discuss how the stats work since there's a lot of specifics involved depending on if you are rolling as your character alone or your character piloting a mech. In all BCG rolls, you roll 1d10 plus the relevant stat against a difficulty number, or DN, of which the default is 5. And as long as you are equal or go over that number, it is a success. This is slightly different for combat, but we will explain that when we get there. There's also a mixed test where you roll 2 tests and average out ranks, as well as advantages and disadvantages. When you start BCG, you are given a base level. This determines the starting XP of your game and how many points you have to build both your character and your mech. In short, every point of XP is a point to spend on both your character and your mech, known as character and mech points, obviously. And now, stats. Much like a lot of other RPG games, in the giant robot genre you have 2 sets of stats, one for you as the player and one for your giant robot. Unlike other tabletop RPG games, those 2 stat blocks rarely interact. The idea is that the stats you have as a player represent the time you spend out of mech, being social, perhaps acquiring more gear, or just fighting your way to the giant robot, whereas the mech stats represent you and your mech together. As a result, very little by way of attributes and skills carries over from you as a player to your mech. That being said, combat for both is very similar, so we'll be describing stats and skills and genre powers for the player before going into the mech stats and upgrades. Damage will be covered in combat. Players have 6 stats: fitness, intellect, charm, awareness, willpower, and resources. To pass a test, you roll 1d10 and compare it to the difficulty number for the task. That's it. But Mike, I hear you say, didn't you mention skills? I did. Having a skill means that when you roll and can apply it to that roll, you gain advantage, as in you roll twice and take the more favorable outcome. Likewise, the GM can impose disadvantage. There are 2 kinds of skills, specific and general. General skills fall under the category of things like combat or deception, whereas a specific skill for those 2 would be dueling and disguises. Specific skills are cheaper than general skills, as general skills give you advantage over all the possible situations where that skill would apply. You cannot gain a specific skill for something that falls under a general skill. As such, the advantages don't stack. You also have things called traits, which are like little powers or feats in other systems. These can run the gamut to help make your time out of your mech as interesting as possible, and they range from basic common sense to having the Fist of the North Star. Heck, some of them make you a psychic. The only character ability that really affects your mech are called genre powers. These are special abilities that you get as a pilot that you use on the battlefield. They are incredibly powerful and range from using leftover XP to get an upgrade mid-scene to making your allies' failed attack a success. To pay for these, you have genre points. You have 1 point per level, and you can regain them by using genre themes. Genre themes are elements that define your character, and they come in 3 kinds. Reasons, which are the PC's personal motivation, typecasts, which are how your PC acts within the group, and banes, which represent your PC's most fatal flaw. You need 1 of each for your PC. But you didn't come for a basic system on people, you came for the giant robot fighting. Mech stats, much like players, have 6. Might, guard, energy, systems, threshold, and speed. Each are geared for mech combat and complement in various ways. Your mech has 5 zones, 4 of which can have either upgrades or weapons equipped. You can place any upgrades or weapons wherever you wish, but try and spread it out because you can lose limbs in combat. Upgrades and weapons fall into too many categories and are far too unique to recount in any meaningful way for the purposes of this tutorial. So you'll have to take a look, but if you can imagine it, you can do it. Of course you can transform and combine robots, because I wouldn't like a system if you couldn't. Now, the one golden rule of designing your mech is that regardless of what the rules say, your upgrades and weapons can take on whatever form you like. So a weapon that in the stats is referred to as a chain blade, which in the stats is an unreliable weapon that deals additional damage, could be a warhammer, like chainsword, a drill that will pierce the heavens, or a lance made of bees that stings the enemy after you hit them with said lance. Have fun. But we now must explain combat. Combat is referred to as matches when you're not in your mech and operations while you're in it. Combat for BCG is reasonably similar between the two, but there are differences. I'm going to try to combine both into one. Pray for me. Both matches and operations have pre-combat phase, which is a surprise round for matches and equipment and form selection for operations, because no giant robot ever should sneak up on anything. Then there is initiative for both. Matches roll a mixed fixed and awareness test, while operations roll speed. Highest goes first. You can trade initiative positions with people at the top of the round, as long as they're on your side. Now at this point for mechs, you and your players must determine starting positions on the battlefield for both players, and their base ships, should they have them. Matches don't have this phase. Then comes my favorite part, tension. Every round has what's called the tension. It starts at 1 and increases by 1 for every round. This number is added to your combat tests for both matches and operates so as combat goes on, the bigger it gets. For your turn, you get 1 movement and 1 combat action. Player characters can only move 1 zone while mechs can move up to their speed. Mechs also restore their energy at the start of the round should they have attacks which consume it. To make an offensive test, player characters roll their fitness, while mechs roll their might. You have to roll over your opponent's defense, and however much you exceeded that number by is how much damage you do. For pilots, its value is equal to awareness plus 5, and for mechs, it's their guard plus 5. Then you simply finish the round and get to the new one. Lastly, there's damage. Both character and mech have several levels of damage called plot armor for characters and threshold for mechs. The idea is that both mech and player have multiple levels of health. Players have 3 layers and must make a willpower test should damage fill a single layer. Each layer increases the DN for that layer from 10 to 15 to 20. After that, you have to make a DN 20 willpower save every time you take damage. Each layer takes longer and longer to heal from the further down you go. Mechs have 4 layers, but don't need to make willpower tests. Instead, one of the 4 areas of your mech is maimed, and all upgrades and weapons on that area no longer work. If the damage is odd, it's the defender's choice. If it's even, it's the attacker's. And that was Battle Century G. I have gradually fallen more and more in love with it for all the things that I can do with it, and I'm happy to show it to you at the next D20 Live game. See you then.